Obviously, this isn't about a love story, but this is about the many ways of doing the same things in Photoshop. There are lots of ways to do the same thing, sometimes three, sometimes five different ways to accomplish the same thing. So I'm going to concentrate on showing you what I think is the easiest way to do some of the major things in Photoshop. For those of you that have a little more experience in Photoshop, hopefully you can glean some things from this lesson also. But just because I only show you these particular methods to get the job done doesn't mean you shouldn't experiment. As a matter of fact, you obviously should experiment and find the way you are most comfortable with, because it's very important that you're very comfortable with the way you process your own images. So let's get started, shall we? So you should have this particular image somewhere in your image files. If you don't, you're certainly going to be able to have them soon enough. They're there on our website to download them, and of course you're just now getting familiar with the fact that we have a website. So Photoshop Senior Edition has all the study materials you need, the images to work on, and videos covering those lessons. So first thing you do, and this doesn't just apply to people pictures. So for those of you that also do wildlife and landscapes and so forth, doesn't mean what I'm going to show you right now doesn't apply, because it's just the opposite. All of these things need to be done in any image. First of all, you have to look around and see if there's something that's wrong. Obviously, my degree is in photography, so back in the day when I was very active shooting photographs, I would blow things up on my computer or on a light table using a loupe and look very closely at a landscape, for instance, to see if there are any little dots and scratches in the background that when I print this, it's not going to look so great. So I had to take care of the blemish issues. So same thing here. This makes it a little more personal when we look at a person. And of course, we want to look in detail. To look from here, her face looks like it would be perfect. But of course, we need to get in closer to make sure that that in fact is the case. So we have a magnifying glass over here on the left-hand side. If your Photoshop hasn't been set up yet, you can go to Edit, go down to the toolbar, and you can edit this toolbar any way you want it. Now, this right here is represented right here. These are all the things that you can put into your toolbar. So if you want this single column marquee tool, you can simply click and drag it wherever you want to in any of these particular places. Now, it would make sense to have it with the other marquee tools, but I don't use this very much, so I don't include it. So I'm just going to drag it back over there and get rid of it. If I left it in there, it would then appear over here with the other tools for the marquee tools, sorry. So you can go through here, and there's many more tools, obviously. If you look over here on this side, let me close this. It doesn't want to work with both of these open. Right here, there's a little arrow, tiny little arrow. And if you click and hold that down, you'll see that there's multiple tools under that. So let's go back to the toolbar again, and you'll see here is that tool. So right here you see the patch tool showing right now because that's the last thing I clicked on. But if they were over here, those would be grouped together typically over here already. So if you said, no, I want this one, that one, and so forth, but not the other, that's totally up to you. You get to control everything that's in your toolbar, just like it's a tool set. You want it to be personal. So you can, start out with everything that's there if you want to. And then after a while, when you work in Photoshop, you might decide, I don't need all this stuff there. And you can just pull it and drop it back out of the way to wherever you want it to be. Okay? So what we need to do is to get in close on something. The magnifying glass is a very typical way. Now, I said I'm going to show you one way of doing everything. Not everything, but 10 very important things. But sometimes we don't want to take the time to go from out here to over here and click on the magnifying glass, which when active we can, come over here and click to make things bigger. I'm sorry, this isn't the magnifying glass. That's the smudge and all that. Right down here is that's the dodge tool. So right here is the magnifying glass. My bad. So we come over here and we can click one at a time until we get her greatly enlarged. We can also do another little trick. If you're on a Macintosh, it works. Some of the keyboard shortcuts are a little different. But if you're on a Windows machine, you would do a Control minus to make this smaller, or Control plus to make this larger. Okay? So I'm doing a bunch of Control minuses. If it's Macintosh, it would be Command minus or plus. So I'm doing Command plus right now. All right. So we've got it bigger. Let's go another little jump there. Now, if I hold down my space bar, I always put my index finger on my space bar. I have it on the keyboard anyway. You see a couple of little things here. Now, her face is in really pretty good shape, obviously. But there are a couple of things that I'm sure, as the subject, she would probably appreciate you getting rid of it for her. So I zoomed in a little bit more here so I could really look at the details. Now, if I'm not sure, I didn't photograph this model, and it lacks a lot of contrast. The lighting isn't just perfect, or it's not processed particularly well. But I suspect this is probably a stud in her lip, but for the sake of this lesson, I'm going to get rid of that because I'm not even sure about it. Now we've got a couple of things, and now I'm going to use my hand, so to speak, my hand tool to move around in the screen. If you look under the magnifying glass, there's also a hand, or you can press the letter H. What I do instead is press the space bar down, just hold that down, and I can move around anywhere I want to. So that makes it pretty handy. Another thing that you can do is go up here under Window and down to, let's see where we are here, Navigator. The Navigator also is a fantastic little tool. You see the slider here. What the slider does, see the mountain and the low hills? Now if I want it bigger, I move it towards the mountain, towards the low hills. So pretty obvious. Now if I want to get right on her eyes, I go up here in that box, and with the little hand, I can move it wherever I want to. So now I can get in there a little bit more. So here I am, after telling you I'm going to show you one way to do things. I've already showed you a couple of different things and a couple of different ways of doing it. But it's important sometimes to realize there's an easier way to do things. I'm all about shortcuts because shortcuts help you to speed your work up. The less processing time, the better. You have other things to do, and so you need to really get right in and get it done. I'm not saying that you shouldn't enjoy your work. I'm just saying that efficiency is an important thing too, because it can get frustrating if you spend too much time working on something you think you should be able to knock out faster. So I'm going to get rid of a few things in here, and believe me, this particular version of Photoshop has made life a lot easier for Photoshop artistry. So if we go over here now to this little group of tools, you see the letter is J. So you can press J. Let's see, say we're on this right now and J is not active. We can just press the letter J on the keyboard and notice now this is highlighted. So the first tool there is called the Spot Healing Brush tool. And you can come out here and paint and look what it does. It fills in what it thinks is what you want to clean this up with. Well, obviously in this case, it's not a good idea. So to undo that, very simple keyboard shortcut. Control, hold down your Control or Command key on a Mac and press the letter Z as in 0. Okay, and that just goes away. All right, so and you never should use anything that big on something like this anyway. That causes issues in and of itself. What we need to do is make this, and that's a brush. Anytime you see anything like this or like this, that it's a brush. So we can control the size of that brush very easily. For instance, watch what happens when I right-click on my mouse. We get this to pop up. So this shows you the size, and this shows you how hard the edge is on that. And normally we want this all the way to the left. Notice it says hardness is 0. That means right now this brush is 100% soft. We slide it over this way, it's 100% hard. That means the edges are quite sharp on there, and it's not very often that we'll use the hardness, but I will show you some instances of that, if not this week, next week. So we'll move that back over there, and then we'll need to click up here so we don't affect anything in the image, and we'll just make a little spot there, hit that, and now see it's not trying to pop an eyeball in its place. So we go through here and clean this up a little bit. And things like this before, they just used to take a lot of time because we had one tool to use, and that was the clone stamp tool. Some people call it the rubber stamp. Now you don't want to get rid of freckles, okay? I don't think the person would appreciate that very much. Now the other thing that we can do to help us, because there are sometimes issues, like there'll be an issue here if I try to clean that up. See, it didn't quite, it left like a spot there. So sometimes we have to have the ability, I did a Control Z, we have to have the ability to clone from a specific space or specific area to make this work. To do that, we go right back over here, and instead of using spot healing, we'll use healing brush tool. So now to use this, I'm going to make the brush a little bit bigger. Remember, right bracket key. Bracket keys are up there by the letter P. So right now I hold down my Alt key, and that sets you see a target there. So if I click once with my mouse, it samples that area. Now I go over here where the bad area is. See how that's trying to cover that up automatically? So I just paint, and that heals this with material we got there. The difference is in this tool, and here's the old clone stamp tool right here. The difference in using this and this tool, if we clone, let's say we want to clean this freckle off, and we try to sample from over here with some skin, and we clone over that, see what happened? It used the same lightness of skin over here, just like it is here. It cloned it over here, and it doesn't, the lighting's not right. So I'm going to do a Control Z again, get rid of that. And this time I'm going to use this tool, and I'll sample from over here with the Alt key down and come over here and paint. And it looked like it was going to paint light, didn't it? But now look, it's perfect. The reason why is the healing tool over here looks at your lights and darkness, your shadows and all that, and calculates to make sure it's going to fit in the area that you're trying to use it. So this becomes a very nice tool to have in the toolkit. Okay. Sometimes you'll get edges that you don't particularly like, down noses and so forth. So if we sample right here, we can kind of smooth that out a little bit. See how much smoother that transition is? Under here, we can also sample this information and smooth it out a little bit as well. Now you got to concern yourself a little bit because what you're doing also is making that area softer. So it doesn't hurt in an area like that so much, but if you do something like that around the eyes or the mouth or whatever, you're going to soften that area and it will be noticeable. So we've got any blemishes, I think, pretty well taken care of. Let's go ahead and sample right here and get rid of some of this right here. So this thing you can kind of drag along when you're in material or into data that's very similar. You know, look at this. I'm going to clone from this lighter area over into here. And see, it's just adjusting it and blending right in. All right, so let's back out, see what we got here. The edge here I think looks a lot nicer, but we've cleaned up the blemishes on the face. Now we need to think in terms of blemishes in the background. Now, this is a chalkboard behind her, so it's going to have problems on it. We're not going to worry too much about that. But if there's a background there that has looks like a scrape or a spot of white that just kind of glares at you like this, then maybe it's time to just give that a little. And notice my brush is pretty small. You don't want anything that's going to be a distraction to your model. You may be paying for that model's time, and you don't want to have a bad photograph of her to show as your results. So around on her arms, it's perfect. We got some freckles. That's all I see there. No blemishes. In here, little redness right there in that. So I'm going to bet that that's not a freckle. I'm going to eliminate that right down there. That looks a little red. I think if this were a higher quality image like you would take, we would be able to see the redness better and be able to make that judgment call whether it's a freckle. A lot of times you'll know the model, and of course if you're taking the picture, you should be observing those particular things. If there's any blemishes because she's a teenager at the time or something. We all been there and fought things like that. See, I can't tell if that's a freckle right there or not, but I'm going to go ahead and just for the sake of showing you how to get rid of some of this stuff. And I'm just going to use a different area to go through here and just make sure it's kind of cleaned up. Right here on this lip, let's just say we want to make that blend in a little bit more. And you can get rid of this hair that's right here if you want to. If that's distracting to you, we can just run it through there. And notice it's studying the light. It's not messing up because we're going from a light area to a dark area and that hair is now gone. So something to keep in mind. We spent already several minutes just going through this part. But getting rid of the blemishes is really a good thing to do first, because if you run contrast or sharpen on things, you're going to make those things even worse. Okay? Now I mentioned that the clone stamp, that's shortcomings, but there are times when the clone stamp will really come in handy. And you're going to find that out by trial and error more than anything, because you're not going to remember every little thing that I show you today. Even if you come back and watch the video very often, you may be not getting the part on all of this. So let me just show you again how the rubber stamp works. It works very similar to the healing brush, but it doesn't adjust for light and dark areas. It just gives you where you sample and kind of follows along. So if I hold down my Alt key to take a sample, if I come down here right now, all it's giving me is exactly what's seen. See the crosshairs? Well, that's where it's sampling from. And then I'm painting where the circle is. So if I sample the eyeball and paint up here, that's all it's going to give you is the eyeball, and see how much lighter it is there. On the forehead. So it's a kind of a different deal there. Now, you can't, we went several brush strokes. I did. And you can't go back with Control Z all the way usually. So if you let go, let me show you. Let me sample on the eyeball again. And I go like this. And then I let go of the mouse, quit painting. And then I start again. Well, now it's sampling from the same spot again. So if you let go, you're kind of messed up if you're trying to do something like this. I'll have to hit Control Z twice to get rid of that. Let's try it again. I'll sample from here, and I'm just going to paint in a circle to try to bring the eyeball back in. Okay, so I let go, and now if I don't get this perfectly where I started, it's going to just have a double image there. So I got it pretty close to where it was, right? So let's undo that a couple of times. Now, if I sample from here again and go like that, and I let go, I'm not holding it down anymore, and I paint a little bit again, let go, paint a little again over here, and let go and let go. I can't do one Control Z to get rid of that. Sometimes you have to go back many steps. So you can do a Control or Command if you have Mac, Alt, and Z. Lets you keep going back, back, back. The other thing you can do is go up in your window and down to History. And my history is already over here next to my layers. And we'll talk about setting your panels up a little later. But see, here are all my the things I just did, showing you about the rubber stamp or the clone stamp tool. So I can go back and back and back and back on all of these things so far. And see, I can't get back to a lot of stuff because I did too much of that. So I can't, let's see, spot healing brush. Let me zoom out so you can see the difference. Let's go back down here and let's click here. I don't know if you saw it, but some of this up in here that I fixed is going away. Let's see if I can go up here and see if you can see in the face. See right there, that went dark. If I go all the way back down, and here it lightened back up again. So we can go back a lot of steps through the history, but after a while you can run out of history. Okay, so it has its limitations, but this is worth its weight in gold if you just kind of mess up a 2 or 3 steps. And when I was at the university, we couldn't go back that far. We had Photoshop. I think we started with 4 and finally got into 5, and we only had one undo on 4. That means if you messed up something, you could, if you didn't click again, you could go back one step. So if I did something like this, let's just zoom in on here, and I've still got the, let's go to the rubber stamp tool. And I make this bigger, my right bracket key to make that bigger. And I'm going to sample from the hair right here. So I go over here and I paint with hair. Notice it's kind of faded. That's because this opacity is only at 35. So now if I clone, it's 100%. So if I do that a lot, I can keep making hair, but it's not going to look exactly right. But let me just show you. If I did something like that to experiment, which I always encourage students to experiment with Photoshop, if I try to do a Control Z, that is go back one spot, I'm still left with all that other nonsense I did. Now, next week we're going to get into layers, and we're going to get into layer masks. And a mask really breaks loose power inside of Photoshop like you can't believe, and you're going to see examples of that. Right now here's our layer palette, and we have one layer. But right down here is a new layer icon. I can click it and get all kinds of new layers if I want to. I'm doing a Control-Alt-Z here to get rid of multiple layers. I can also do, no, let's just get her back to looking normal. Get her hair back right. If I decide to, let me see, I'm going to do a Control-0. Hopefully you have notebook. Control-0 immediately fills the screen as much as it can with the whole image. So it's a good place to return to see what we've done, kind of evaluate things. Again, Control plus zooms in, Control minus zooms out, and Control-0 zooms all the way out to fill the screen. All right, so lots of little tips thrown at you, and hope you don't get writer's cramps. But remember, this video is available to you anytime you need it too. So let's just say you don't know anything about layers, and some of you probably don't. I'm going to create a couple of layers. I'm going to create a layer from just this, Control-J, and that puts just that little piece on its own layer. And let's go here, and I'm going to do another Control-J, and I'm going to go here, and another Control-J. Turn those off, and you can see what of her I have here. And all of those pieces are individuals. So if I turn on the Move tool and I click on the head over here, you can see I can move that all around. Click on this, and I'll click on this part. See if we can move that together and see what it looks like. Kind of different. All right, so we can have tons and more than 100 different layers if we want to. And we're going to get into how to kind of save some space, because 100 layers becomes very hard to keep track of. Let me just show you. That's just a few extra layers of the same thing, and you have to go through there and figure out which one it is you want to work on. Okay, so I'll show you how to group these things together and so forth, but we won't worry about that right now. If you want to get rid of a layer, right down here is a little tiny trash can. You just click it and stuff starts going away. Whatever's highlighted is the layer that's being affected, and then now we're back to the original background layer. So we're going to be able to do lots of things with layers. We've cleaned up all the blemishes that she had on this single layer. But what if we would have fixed all those blemishes and put them on their very own layer? So if we didn't like, if she came back to us after we printed this and she said, "What did you do with all my freckles?" Well, if we had that stuff there on a new layer where we covered over her freckles, we could bring it all over back in no time at all, seconds. So we'll get into that starting next week, and you'll see what I mean about using the additional layers and layer masks. Okay, this is an old house up at Xenia, nearby Salem, nearby Flora, Illinois, and it just intrigued me one day and I thought I got to get it back there and photograph that. This is my old beater that I run around doing photography in. It's set in the garage now for months and months. I need to get back out there. So anyway, there's something wrong with this image. A couple of things. For one thing, it's angled tilting to the left, and it's not straight. The other issue. Now, cool thing, if we go over here to the crop tool, and that's the fourth one down. If you're just learning Photoshop, some of the first things you want to do with your photograph, obviously, is crop it. You don't want to work on a photograph that's still huge and full of junk on the sides, right? If there's stuff you intend to get rid of during the crop, that's the time to do it, which should be up there at the close to the beginning of your process. First, you got to clean up the junk around the blemishes and so forth, but after that, you need to think in terms of cropping. So I'm going to straighten this image, and if I draw, you find a straight area for one thing, and I'm just going to go across the top of this piece right here. Just draw it right along the top of the brick. Watch what happens. All right, it turned the house slightly, and now it's a lot more level. We also need to, and I always put this on ratio to start with. Now, if I knew that I wanted this to be an 8 by 10, I would go with something like this instead. Width, height. And so over here, if we were going to print this, we could put this as an 8 by 10, so it'd be 10 IN. Then over here it would be 8 IN. So you see, that's all the room you have to work with. So if you're going to make something into an 8 by 10, whatever your subject is, if it's this big, you got to make sure you have extra room, because if I crop this anymore, we're going to lose this building or this extension on the building over here. If I try to go up here, I don't have anything there. I can kind of stretch this out a little bit. Now if I click in here, I can push it this way. Person naturally wants to push it the opposite way, but I've lost part of the top here. So if let's just see if I can maybe bring that up. All right, we got both. And you see what it's done to the image. We got more junk than what we want. Now this isn't going to work perfectly, but let me show you what it's capable of. Content aware is a little check you can put there beside it. Will do its best to fill in areas with what it thinks is good material. So let's just hit enter, or double click it actually inside, and you see what it does. And it didn't do a very bad job. We don't want those wires anyway, right? So we can go up here, turn on the rectangular marquee tool, select all those wires, and we can go to edit, fill. Now you can fill it with all kinds of colors or what's called content aware, and that's what we did earlier, is tell Photoshop, fill this with your best judgment. This is basically what we're saying. We click OK, and look at what it did. It got rid of all those wires for us, and life is sweet again. Now down here in the bottom left, I'm going to zoom in on it. Now I'm holding my control key and space bar down. I got my little pinky on my control key and my index finger on the space bar, and I'm clicking right there, so we can see that edge a little bit. Now I'm going to get rid of that. There's several ways to do it, but I'm going to use content aware again. So I take this little lasso tool and I just make a selection around it. That doesn't have to be pretty, and go back to fill, content aware, okay. And let's do a Control 0. Now, that's some of the magic of Photoshop. It works beautifully on so many things. It's just uncanny. And we can put some of our own sky in this image if we want to from another image. But that's down the road, okay? Just wanted you to see that. Now, how else can we do things with this image? Now, this isn't, we'll do something else here shortly, but I want you to see what, this other tool is also in here with the spot healing brush. It's called the patch tool. And we're going, all right, I'm sorry, it's called the content aware tool. So what I'm going to do is make a selection around some of these windows and move them. And it's kind of amazing. I'm just going to use this tool, this rectangular marquee tool again, and move this window. Made a nice selection around it. I'm going to move it, and it's just going to put brick back where this window is now. So it heals itself and allows you to move the window wherever you want to go. So let's go back over there, that tool, which is right here. And we click and start moving it. And let's just say we want to put it over here with these other windows. So you want to try to keep things aligned if you can. And the way I do that, I'm going to do a Control Z to put that back where it was. I start moving it and I hold the Shift key down, and that way it keeps it lined up. So we'll just put it over here. Now, it's not doing anything yet, but once we double click that, window's gone from here, the window's now over here. Slick, isn't it? So let's say we want, and I'll just use the tool here to make the selection here. I don't have to have that marquee tool to do it. Let go there. Let's take it up. Actually, I should be using the Shift key to keep it lined up. And we'll just go up here. Double click. That's gone down there. We brought it up here. This can kind of mess with your head, but it's an amazing tool to use. And there's a sneak preview out now where this gets even more powerful. So just a little heads up that this is being refined. Okay, the patch tool, which is right here, let's just look and see what happens with the patch tool. So the patch tool will take it and just get rid of it. I don't care too much for the way that piece ended up. Let's just move it down there. Anytime you get a result you're not particularly crazy with, just make another selection around it, and it'll usually turn out just fine. I'm going to get rid of this window now. That didn't do such a great job. So then you got to kind of piecemeal it. This tool has a lot more limitations than the content aware move. You can see we've kind of messed that up now. So to go back what I mentioned a while ago, how do we get back to where this window was over here? Okay, so we got to go back into history again. Let's see how far we can go. Can we get the, yeah, we got the windows back where they were. And the house is cropped. So we're pretty good shape. That was a lucky guess. Sometimes you got to just click on it and see where you're at. Isn't that great though, to be able to see your different moves that you made? So there we are. Okay, so I want to show you something else about the layers again. Remember, we've got this layer here with the background, right? And right now, if I paint on it, I'm going to turn on a regular paintbrush. Let me just look at the brush real quick and see what we get here. We want it to be soft, and the size, we want it bigger. than that. Remember, we can fine tune the size. Let me do a Control Z by using the right bracket, left bracket keys. I'm going to make this a little bit harder, maybe around in there, just so that it's not quite so fuzzy a paint. There we go. So right now, if I paint, let's get something a little less horrific than the red all over the top of her. So if I just go like this, it's right on top. As you can look at the background and see, it's on top of her. There's nothing I can do with it. If I try to erase it, here's the eraser, or you can press the letter E for eraser. Tricky, huh? If I make that brush bigger and try to erase that, that should be on 100%. I'm erasing everything. I'm erasing back to the background that's behind this. Or actually, there's nothing. That's just the way the image is. It's black back there. So that won't get rid of anything because it's all on top of this one layer. Let's just go back in history and get her where she was. Now if I create another layer, I'll just click this little layer down here. You can let's see, we can do a Control Alt. It's Control Alt Shift N. I like to just click on the little icon down there. Control Alt Shift N can get a little tricky sometimes. But anyway, there's our new layer. It's blank. The checkerboard in there means there's nothing there. It's completely blank. All right, so now if I paint over her, let's make the brush a little bit smaller. And again, I'm going to go, no, that's the eraser tool. Got to get it back on the paintbrush. You can press the letter B to get the brush. And I'm going to make that harder. And smaller, left bracket. And here we go. See, I can't even draw a normal line. Now, speaking of which, Control Z. If I change the smoothing up here, watch what happens to my zigzags now. Notice how smooth they are now compared to the way they were. Now, I don't use smoothing very often, but sometimes it's necessary to keep it from getting too horrible. Now, if I want to erase the paint, guess what? It'll erase, right? So that's cool. Do a Control Alt Z, get that back to where it was. I can erase right through the middle of it if I want to. Because I'm not erasing anything on her layer, I'm erasing on the layer that's above it. So let's do a Control Z to bring it all back. Let's do one more layer, and now we'll use that nice bright red. And this time we'll start from over here, paintbrush, not eraser, and here we go. So now we have the snakes going different directions, and neither one of them are actually affecting her layer because they're right here. If we turn those eyeballs off, she's just fine. Nothing's really painted on top of her. That's the beauty of having layers. You can do all kinds of other stuff without ruining your subject or your the background. If you had a beautiful sky or whatever, you don't want to you want to keep it nice and pure, but still be able to edit these things. For instance, if I turn my eraser on and I just go along here, and I'm going to make that hard. After me telling you you don't use hard that often, I'm going to use hard. So we can reshape things that are in here, and we're not affecting anything else, right? Yeah, let's just take away some from that. Now if I want to work on the yellow, I need to go down to the yellow layer. And now I can do things with the yellow layer. Again, still not touching or hurting my original layer at all. So we can do just all kinds of things now and not affect her. So I'm going to undo that. Now the other thing, I'm going to turn those off real quick, that people like to do is cut something or somebody from an image. Now this isn't going to be the greatest job in the world right here, because actually let's switch images where we have some more contrast. Okay, so in this image we do have a lot more contrast. We're going to ask Photoshop for some help with this. Okay, so we're going to click on the automatic selection, the quick selection tool. Now you don't have to do anything with this tool, you just simply turn it on. And then you go up here at the top and say select subject. And Photoshop starts thinking, what's the subject here? And guess what? These marching ants is what makes the selection. Anything that's within the marching ants, and they're called marching ants because there's literally the movement in that. See how it seems to be traveling like a bunch of ants? So anything that's within that, I'm going to do a Control-0 so you can see it all, is editable. Anything on the outside of that selection is not editable. For instance, if I turn on my paintbrush now and red's the paint, and I try to paint here, nothing happens. But if I go inside the marching ants, I can paint. Let me show you that again. Nothing will paint out here, but once I paint inside the marching ants, go back out, it stops, right? So everything inside the marching ants is editable. But I want this to be even better. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to click on go back to that tool again, and I'm going to click on this auto select, basically is what this is. Target $30 off, yeah. Select and mask, and I'll get rid of that. And you see what it did. It just chopped out everything in the background. I don't like that particular view of it. You can go to any of these views and see what it's got. This is called mask. Black/white is masking. Okay, so let's look around. Since she is on, and this just stands for mask. There's the marching ants again. Let's go with this. Now, if I go over here, for some reason I've lost my slider. But I can change the amount of selection I've got by changing this radius. There's normally a slider right up here that allows you to dim the background. Now if I take this, make my brush bigger, and I'm using my right bracket key, and I paint through here, notice it's eliminating a bunch of the blue left from the previous background, right? We'll run it right down here. And sometimes you got to give Photoshop a few minutes to declare what needs to go and what doesn't. All right, now it's done a pretty fantastic job. We're all the way down on the image. Maybe right in here, will it get that? Yeah. All right, now right down here is a decontamination of colors. If I click that, sometimes you'll see it get rid of any other background colors that try to sneak in there. So let's see if we can take this back down, or you can go back up, but this is going to chop more of the hair if you go too far. So you got to kind of be careful. The thing about decontaminate is you've got a slider on it, so if it takes away too much hair or whatever, you just back it off. I'm going to go with right about there. Now here's the trick. Once it's in here, you go down here to output to, you want new layer with layer mask. So you got to drop down there and you want new layer with layer mask, and you click OK. Now you notice here's the original picture, and here's our picture with the mask on it. Our background is completely gone. Now what if I paint, let's create a new layer, And I'm going to paint with the paintbrush. And let's use the red again. And I'm going to paint like so. And I'm going to create another layer and go back to doing that with the yellow. There's no special reason for me using red and yellow. Let's just use orange. Nah, it won't stand. Let's go with green. And click OK. And this time we'll go like this. Alright, so we've already seen this in the other picture. We're not hurting her image because these are on their own layer, right? Now, in the other thing, in the other image, we couldn't put anything behind her. But watch this. That layer just went behind her, and that layer just went behind her. And I can click on the green. Let's click on the move tool, and I can move the green wherever I want to in the image. And the red. So that's one of the big things that people do in Photoshop also. They grab people or things, certain items from one image, and they'll move it into another image to make it more interesting. Maybe somebody's just standing there and you put a guitar in their hand, whatever. You can see you can manipulate the image lots of different ways, and we're going to see some more of that in just a moment. Okay, what if we bring these two layers back? And I'm going to show you something that this is layer masking. I'm going to put a layer on this mask that will allow us to do more things. Right down here at the bottom is what I always refer to as the square donut. If you click that, that's the layer mask icon. And let's put one on here also, little square donut. Now, to make things go away in Photoshop, we would paint with black. We'll turn on a brush. If we want to make things appear, we paint with white. And I'm going to show you just a second how all that works. I want to see through the red. So if I paint with black on this red layer, I can erase or hide whatever I want to. Let's erase some of this and some of this. All right. Now the thing is, I have not erased anything. All that red is still there. You can still see it right here in that thumbnail. If I switch this to white, remember I said white makes things appear and black hides? Watch. So I didn't do anything other than hide it. You see, I've still got some scraps there, so I'm going to make it bigger and bring everything back. Now you see pure white over there. So now I'll go down to the green and do the same thing. I'm just going to paint with black. Let's switch that to black. You can switch it with these little arrows. This is your foreground and background colors to work with, and if you just double click on whatever the top color is, you get a color picker. And this color picker allows you to pick about any color you can possibly imagine. If I pick a yellow, I can go down here and get a dark yellow. I can make it a brighter yellow and very whitish yellow, dingy colors, so forth. All right. So that's your color picker, and we'll just keep that on black, and we'll make some of this green go away here real quick so we can see Christy. So we didn't really, again, we didn't really paint it away. We simply hid it. And now if I paint with white again, I'm pressing the letter X. X toggles that back and forth. With white, I let it reappear. So we can tweak it. I didn't get rid of all that black stuff, did I? There we go. Pretty much. All right, so hopefully this is going to become a little bit more clear as we go. but we're going to show you the power that these layer masks have. Now, if I don't want to see this layer mask, I can right click it and say disable. So if I want to do that, I can. So if there's something painted in black there, I can disable it. If I don't want to see these things on top of it, I can just turn their eyeballs off. Now, hopefully, now this is just, again, I don't expect you to run with this and be able to do all this stuff that we've seen today. Remember, you're going to have the video. It's on YouTube. At the end of our 4 sessions, you'll all be given a DVD with all of this stuff on there, so you can rewind it, stop it, play it, stop it, rewind, so forth. So practice is the big thing in Photoshop. Really a big deal. Okay? Okay, so now we've got Surfing Guy. Now, we're going to use a tool that we used earlier just to demonstrate some of the power of this. And we're going to try the patch tool first just to see if we can make him go away. Let's just grab all of this and let's use some of this. And, you know, it's interesting. Maybe sample some of this. And, you know, if you didn't know what was already there, chances are good you wouldn't notice. You're sort of like, why did you take a picture of a wave? You know. So let's go back in time to where we started, because I want you to see, again, what the Content Aware Move tool will do. So we're just going to grab, say, this much, and we're going to move him more forward, more towards the center of the image, maybe. Now, nothing's going to happen until you do a double click. So there you see, it did a pretty amazing job of sticking him in there. Now, you may want to use the patch tool to come down here and blend this part right here a little bit better and maybe sample from this stuff here. Now that looks pretty natural. What if now we bring over the picture of Christy, and let's see, which one was he? That's not him. He's right there. So we're going to grab Christy from here, and we've got the mask here still yet. I'm going to take the mask and everything over to that other image. So I'm going to click and hold and drag that up, lay it on top of that other image, bring it down, and let go. Now she's a little bit too big for this image, so I'm going to do a Control T. T as in Tango. That gives us a box. Let me make this bigger so you can see the whole box. This represents the entire image with Christy on it. So if I hold down my Shift key and go like this, I can make it smaller, transforming it, keeping it accurate. If I don't hold down the Shift key, watch what happens. You can distort your image very badly, very quickly. So I'm going to do a Control Z to get it back where it was. Shift key, and we'll just have her right in there. Now notice, because of what we did with the extracting her from the other background, you can see through her hair and see the waves behind her. And that's how you make these extractions, grabbing people or things from one image and putting them into another one, makes it a lot more believable. But because the sun is so bright here, everywhere but in her face, notice this side of him, though, is somewhat shadowed. Most of the sun probably over there. But we can lighten her up more and I think make it a little bit more believable. Again, that's going to involve a layer mask. Like I said, we're not going to go way into a layer mask today. We're going to really start getting into this next week. But the reason I wanted you to see that when I brought her over, the layer mask was with her, If I still needed to tweak her hair to make it more solid or less, I could do it still yet in here. Okay, that's the advantage. Just put that in the back of your memory banks, okay? All right, we're going to do a little bit of magic here. Right up here are the adjustment layers. These are big time important in Photoshop world. Okay, because we can control how an image looks completely with these tools. And all of these tools will lay down a mask with them. So what I want to do is just lighten her face up. So I'm going to do that with this right here. It's called Levels. And I click on that and it gives you this little panel here. And it's going to, I didn't want that big thing there though. Sometimes you get things other than what you want. All right, so I'm going to brighten this up by pulling this middle slider forward. Now, it's really washing everything out, but don't worry about that. All right, that's just the look I want to go with right now because I'm lightening up this side of her hair. All right, so I don't need this open anymore, but I only want this to affect her, not the background. So right down here, this little box here, if I click that, that means it only affects the layer directly below, which is Christy. If I leave that unchecked or unhighlighted, it affects everything in your layers. So I click that and watch what happens to the background. It goes back to normal, but the light is still on Christy, right? See, the background's not doing anything now. Beautiful. All right, so I close that, but right here is my layer mask, and I'm going to do a little wizardry here, and I'm going to fill that layer mask with black. And what that does, remember, black covers, hides, right? So I'm going to go over here, and the shortcut for this is hold down your Control or your Command key if you're on a Mac and hit backspace. That fills that with black. So this layer mask is now solid black. Remember what I said about white? If we paint with white, it allows things to show. We get to see it. So I'm going to turn on the paintbrush. White's on top. I'm going to turn the opacity down quite a bit because I only want to bring that light that we created back a little at a time. I'm going to make sure that this brush is soft, so I right click. Oops. Let's go up here and click on that. We want that all the way soft, and we probably want that a little smaller. This is the box I was trying to get open. So zero hardness is 100% soft. Size looks pretty good. I'll click up there. So if I click in here, it can mess up your picture. So I'm just going to start painting. Can you see how it's lightening up everything? And notice right over here in this mask, that's where I'm painting with white. So it's allowing what I did over here to show through. The black's hiding it, the white is letting it show through. So we'll go in here and lighten this up some more. Lighten this shoulder up some more. I think that's just as cool as it gets. And we can still double click on this and change the light. We can still make it brighter, see? Or darker. We can make it dark instead of light. Let's just go with something like that. Now, if we save this as a Photoshop file, a typical Photoshop file, and let's just look at that real quick. Go to File, Save As, and I called it Fun in the Sun when I worked on it originally. And we want to always look for the top one, Photoshop PSD file. Why? Because if we don't save this, excuse me, if we don't save as a PSD file, these layers will go away. It all flattens into one layer, and I'll show you what that looks like. We'll just go down here where it says flatten image. Now we only have that, and we can't edit anything that we did. We're just stuck with what you see there. So I'm going to do a Control Z to get those layers back. Now if I save this as a Photoshop file, save as, and call it whatever you want. Zigoo PSD. All right. If I close this right now, notice it renamed it right up here, Zigoo PSD. If I open that up again, open, and Zigoo, there it is with all the layers. Notice something else. File open. Here's the way a PSD is going to look. It doesn't show you the thumbnail like these images have. It just shows you PS and PSD. It's a Photoshop document file. So it keeps all of your layers, and if you come back in 5 years and decide that's too light, you can still double click on that and darken it down. All right, because it will still be there just like you chiseled it in stone. All right. Okay, so we've got Christy here, and notice that she's wearing a sweater over a shirt. We're at the beach. This guy's in shorts, and this isn't a typical attire unless things have gone wonky out in the weather world. So we're going to put some text in, kind of fix this up maybe as a Facebook meme, you know. So we click on the T, or you can just press the letter T on your keyboard, and you'll see this little icon or cursor that looks a little bit different, like an I-beam. So you can click and drag a box to type in, or let's escape that. You can click and just start typing, and it goes all the way across. For this one, let's just say, let's just go with the way it is right now. I'm trading, and you notice we're not seeing the text very well. There's some there. If I select it, I can make it bigger. Right here is how big the text is. It's a very strange font, but if I click on these double T's, or don't click on them, but move your mouse on it, there's two little arrows that pop up. So if I click and drag that to the right, it makes the text much bigger. Okay, so if I click, then you can see a little bit more. If we want to change, and I'm typing in white, so that's not very cool. If you go up to this box right here, this is your text color. If you click on that, you can select any color in here that you want to, but guess what? What if you want to select a color that's already in the image, which I do a ton of? You can select this color. You can select her face, her sunglass color, her orange, her hair. You know, it's whatever you want to. Or blue off of her shirt. Let's just try that. We'll click over there, and I think I forgot my apostrophe here. I don't really like that particular kind of font. Now I have a lot of fonts loaded on this computer. So when I click this to open up my fonts, it's going to take a few seconds for it to come up. So I'm going to just pause for a second and come right back. I lied, it jumped right up. Normally it takes forever. So if I move this text over where we can see it, let me just bring it over here, and I'll double click on the T again. That loads that text up as a selection. So now I'll click back on here, and anything I roll my mouse over, you get to see what it's going to look like. I kind of like, no I don't. No, I definitely don't like that. Let's get something that's kind of playful. Let's try this one. I'm trading my winter and I'm going to press enter for a summer break. Where's my, there, summer break. So now if I select this, just click and drag to select all the text, we can still make this much bigger, and we can see how that moves, changes into a box or an arrow that allows us to move it. And we click on this or the check mark right here, and that completes it. Now, a little hard to read against the colors that we have, but if I go over here and double click on this layer, where the, not where the text is, but above the text or below it, I can go ahead and click on stroke right here, and we can make that stroke any color that we want. Here's the stroke color. So if you want to change it to something like that or something darker, you certainly can. White's just going to be tough to read as well. Let's just go with the black. You can decide how many pixels you want that to be. Let's just go with maybe 2. Now, there's something like you might find on somebody's Facebook page, or something a little more apropos, a little funnier. But what if we don't like that text still yet? Well, if you double click over here on the layers palette, right on where the T is, that loads it up again as a selection. And again, we can go right back over here, and as we move through the different fonts, you can see which one you might want to use. And let's just go with that, moving on over here. Click on the move tool or the checkbox to change that out. So there, something like that. Again, if you want to change your font color, we need to double click. You can click on this or this. Now sometimes you won't see this, but right here it is. If you click that, you can change that. The look of things, you can separate between letters, you can separate more between lines and so forth. Let's just work on the color for right now, and let's make it something a little lighter. And now it stands out a whole lot more. Maybe make the stroke, let's go over here and notice underneath the text, we now have the effects that we put on it, which was the stroke. If we double click on stroke, we can go back in there and make that thicker, so it really stands out a lot more. What else can we do? Let's put a little drop shadow on it, which helps separate it from the background that's there. So if we click inside the image with our mouse, we can actually drag the drop shadow wherever we want. We can make that harder, softer. We can really soften the text up by spreading. And there we go. So what if we want an image like this and save it to put on Facebook or send it to somebody in an email? Well, it's a whole different ball game than if you're wanting to print something and frame it and put it on the wall. I'm going to get rid of this. Now here's the trick. Here's magic numbers for you to remember. If it's a horizontal, like this image is, it's a little bit of a panoramic look because it's very, very wide compared with the tallness of it. But anyway, if you're going to put it on Facebook or in an email and it's a horizontal, you want it to be no more than 640 pixels wide. And if you're going to print a portrait size, a vertical picture, you'd want it to be 450. So let's just go up here real quick. We're going to go to image and down to image size, because this is important. If you're going to save this, you don't want this thing to be 300 and so forth, because then you're going to really have a lot of room taken up for an image that doesn't need it. So if this says 300, 600, 200, whatever, be sure and change the resolution to 72 and do this in the order I show you, because it can really mess up your image if you don't. So once you first go to image and image size, you want to go first to the resolution, make sure it's 72. Then you go up to width and say 640. Now watch what happens when I change this. This will also change because these two are connected. So 640. Now the bottom, the height is only 320. That's fine. Notice we went from a 5 megapixel image, 5.27 M, to a 600K. That's a huge size drop. That's okay. That's what we want. We want to reduce the time it takes for people to load this up on email or Facebook. We don't need the reduced noise turned up like that unless you have a noisy image, and we just click OK. So now it looks like it made it tiny, right? But no, remember, Control-0 makes it full screen size. Now, because we took so much away from it, we lost a little bit inside on the text. Everything else looks good. So you might want to go back and change that stroke to something smaller. So remember, we can go back here in history and we can do a Control-0, go back to the layer, and that stroke there is smaller. We'll double click it and make sure, yeah, 2. So let's do the save again. Remember, we changed it to 4 a while ago. So image size 72, and notice it's pixels. We don't want to save this for the internet as inches, because that's way off base. We want this to be pixels, 640. Remember, if this were a vertical, taller than it is wide, this would be 450 instead of 640. Don't worry about the bottom number. And we click OK. Now see, the text looks much nicer. Now to further compact this image and still have it look good, there's another thing we need to do. Go to File and go down to Export, Save for Web. So if you're sending this over the web in an email or put it in Facebook or Instagram, whatever you're doing, you click on that, and then normally you would get something like this pops up. Click it on to either the 2-up or the 4-up so you can make comparisons. Here's the original. Here's the first one. And notice it's cut it down to 59K, from 600K to 59. Make sure that this up here is set to not GIF, but JPEG. And you can control the opacity, or the quality, I'm sorry, right here. Again, you can click right on that and move that up and down, or you can click on the slider and change that. You got to keep an eye on how small you're making this. Plus, I like to enlarge this a little bit. Remember, we hold down Control, we can click and make it bigger, and look at your details. Make sure she's not getting to look like she's falling apart or anything, the image. And then you can, let me show you what I mean. See, it's falling apart there. So we can just bring that up to where it looks pretty good. That's only 62K. That's tiny compared to what goes over the internet anymore. And we click down here and make sure right here it says width 640. Click Save. And then you put that somewhere on your computer where you can find it real easy to put it on the internet when you're ready. And we're just going to, I've already got it, so I'm not going to save it. But that's all you have to do to save that to go on Facebook or whatever. But now, what if, I'm going to go back and undo that so the image is still big. Could do a Control-Z. What if we wanted to print this? We'll turn that off and we'll say we want a print of this image. Well, in that case, the image quality is down a little bit on this. Ideally, you want an image to be printed with 300 resolution. So we go to image size, and we would want 300 in here. Since we are having to resample from 72 to 300, you might want to click on the reduce noise a little bit, but you want to change this either to preserve details enlargement or preserve details 2.0. I would suggest this one. This will keep quality as best it can as you raise the resolution of it. So if we click OK, and it takes a little while because it's making this into a much larger image and trying to keep quality. So we look at her and did keep the quality, right? Looks pretty good. So now instead of saving it the way we did, save for the web, we'd either save it according to what the printer wants. Number one, if you're not printing itself and you're sending it to a printer, you need to find out what format they want it in. Some outfits will say, let's go to save as. Some will ask you to save it as a PSD file, which we're familiar with. Some will ask you to save it as a JPEG, which reduces the quality a little bit. Be aware of that. Some may ask you to save it as a TIFF image, and some even ask you to save it as a, let me see if I can find it here real quick, PDF. I've known several printers, as a matter of fact, locally I had some big printing work done, 4x5 feet, and they wanted PDF documents. So you just got to know what they want. Your end isn't so bad, and they can let you know if there's any issues or whatever with the file that you sent them. Now chances are, once you're done with this, I would save this as a PSD file for my own files. Then when I'm ready to give it to a printer, I give them a copy of this flattened. So I would, after saving this as a file with layers, which this one already is, I would go and flatten it down. And yes, there's a hidden file. That text is no longer there, not showing. And now the file size is smaller. You can look down in the bottom left to always keep track of your file sizes because we got rid of the extra layers. This is just for printing. So you do the same thing. You know, save it as a different name, Christie Poster 2 or something, you know, give it a unique name so as not to confuse it with any others. All right. Starting very soon, we're going to be talking about the importance next week of saving your work as soon as you open it up. Now, it may sound kind of crazy, but what if you start making some really nice changes to your image and you your power goes out or your computer locks up or Photoshop crashes? Well, the work you did is gone. But if you set your computer up right, save the file somewhere particular, and do Control S every so often, you're doing an automatic save. Your computer, Photoshop, can be set to automatic save for you every 5 minutes, and we'll get into that. For now, that's it. There's a lot for you to grab hold of and work with. Practice, 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 gang, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.